As you travel through the furthest reaches of the galaxy, you pick up a distant transmission. Signal received. Decrypting message.
Welcome to STARCHIVES, presented by Starforce Collective, a crew of spacefaring illustrators on a mission to record nerdy shit for the hope of future generations.
Hello, welcome back to STARCHIVES, your cosmic library for everything geeky and nerdy. I am your commander speaking, Alex Rodway, and as usual, on my left is Hunaid.
Hello guys, how are you doing?
How's it going, man?
Well, how are you?
I'm pretty good, we're still up in space. We're going to be here for a while.
Yeah.
But today we have a very special guest. I think we have special guests almost every
All our guests are special.
Very special. We're finally introducing our science officer. He's been one of my best friends since I was very young, 4th grade, I think. He's a board game wizard. It's Kurt Refling. How's it going, man?
Oh, it goes well. Ahoy! I feel like ahoy is what you say on ships.
Yeah.
Actually, oddly enough, ahoy was originally what you were supposed to say when you answered a telephone. Then the inventor of the telephone had a couple different ways that he thought that it could go. One way was to answer and say ahoy. The other one was hello. And they went with hello. But can you imagine if every time you picked up your saddle, you were like, ahoy!
Or like if that Adele song was ahoy instead of hello.
Ahoy!
Definitely make it more listening worthy.
Oh, that might make it more of a pirate shanty.
Oh man.
Oh,
good times.
That'd be funny.
Space pirate shanty.
Space pirate shanty featuring Adele. I'd listen to the shit out of that. Well, thank you for being aboard this week, Kurt. I think it's been a long time coming. I mean, we wanted to have you on because you're one of my very close nerdy friends from the days of yore. Much like Hunaid is now. Like, we just like having our buddies on the show and talking smack and shit about video games that we like, that we hate.
Talking about movies and comics and
art.
Yeah,
and we're going to be touching on board games at some point. Don't know if it's going to be today, but look forward to that. So Kurt, you work at a board game cafe currently. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I am a board game teacher, which is exactly what it sounds like. For anyone not familiar with a board game cafe, it's just a standard restaurant, bar situation, except instead of having nothing, there's 900 board games. And it's my job to be a sommelier recommending possible board games to pair with their evenings.
And unlike most restaurants where you will just show up for maybe an hour, I know we've spent upwards of 8 hours to 9 hours at board game cafes before.
Yeah, I had some regulars stay there for around 12, very recent shift. And I gotta keep them entertained, so I teach them the rules to the board games and they keep coming back.
Hope you get some mad tips from that then.
Depends on the day, really. Depends on the day.
Depends on the people too, I imagine, right?
Sure, yeah.
As long as you don't get paid Monopoly money, I'm sure.
I mean, you could use it to boost your Monopoly game next time. Don't let my boss hear this. He'll pick up the nicest metal coins from the best board game we have.
Well, speaking of games, the topic of today's episode is going to be about a specific video game, and it's one that's touched all of our lives in some way or another. Particularly back when we were a bit younger and just kind of getting into the world of video games. I was a bit of a late bloomer in that regard compared to Kurt, at least, from what I know. We're gonna find out about Hunaid. I don't even know this. We don't plan this show. Come on. But we're gonna be talking about the Legend of Zelda today. My personal experience with this title, with this series, has been pretty vast. Like I've played probably maybe 75% of the titles that are out now. The big glaring elephant in the room that I haven't played is Majora's Mask. Never touched the game, even though I've been recommended it multiple times, and I really have no excuse anymore because it's come out for 3DS recently.
And by far, I would recommend it as being one of the better Legend of Zelda games.
Yeah.
Even better than Ocarina of Time.
Well, I've heard that. My personal experience with the series, the first game I've played front to back of the series is Wind Waker, and that one remains my favorite, both in art style and just the development of the story. The characters seem to be a little more interesting than other iterations of the game. I mean, I've played Twilight Princess as well and thoroughly enjoyed it, but that game feels a little more standard, like, Link's the hero, Zelda's the princess, Ganon's the bad guy. Wind Waker, it's a little more gray area. You got Link, he's a little more plucky, like he's a little bit more, he's got to save his sister. That's your first and foremost goal. And once you do that, that's when you start to think about Zelda and stuff. And Tetra's a really good character that we haven't really seen anywhere else. And you're not constantly beset by an annoying fairy. You just have kind of a weird talking boat.
Don't be talking smack about Navi.
You like Navi?
He was a cool character.
I'm not anti-Navi. I'm not gonna lie. I know that Navi is the scourge of the internet.
I am in the minority then.
Yeah, that's very strange. That's a strange happenstance. If that's what you like about Wind Waker, you should really, really check out Majora's Mask, because this story,
I will.
I'm sure you've heard it all before, but oh man, the characters are so interestingly developed, and you get this unique slice of their lives. Oh, good gravy. It's gorgeous.
Well, it's my wife's favorite Zelda game too, and it's one that I intend to pick up, if only that she gets to play it again on the 3DS with some enhanced graphics and textures. I didn't realize, because I played through Ocarina of Time maybe 2 years ago on my 3DS when the HD remake came out. I didn't realize how bad the N64 one looks now. Not bad, but dated,
Yeah, the graphics haven't aged well.
Well, yeah, and expectedly so. It was extremely revolutionary for the time, which I think is why it gets as much clout as it does. But Ocarina of Time is interesting because it's kind of the framework for how the series began to develop afterwards. Like before that, it was very exploration based. Like you get to Zelda 2, well, not Zelda 2 so much, but Link to the Past especially. Link to the Past is an excellent game that I loved having the experience playing on an emulator. Shh. Sorry, I don't own a Super Nintendo. It's my bad, but I did eventually play it, and I loved it. And then they came out with Link Between Worlds, which is a direct sequel to that game for the 3DS, and it's fantastic. It's actually one of my favorites now. Feels like it recaptures the old essence of Zelda, of just like exploring different nooks and crannies of the world. The map and all the dungeons are open to you immediately, and where you go is dependent on what you choose to do and what items you choose to rent from Rabio.
It's very much a throwback. I think that we came to associate the Legend of Zelda series with the whole 3D temple-based exploration mechanic that it came to be known for after the Ocarina of Time series. So revolutionized the whole world of 3D third-person gaming. But you really have to consider that their original 2D map-based mechanic was also incredibly new for its time, and people used to think there's two ideas of the Zelda series. You have the 3D and the 2D, and the fact that they're still making excellent 2D games really speaks to the longevity of the format.
It's true.
They've never really stopped. Like in between, was it Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and the GameCube edition with Twilight Princess, they had like the Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, I think.
Yeah, and then Minish Cap and
Four Swords
Adventures, yeah.
And that was one of the first Legend of Zelda games that had co-op built into it as well.
Yeah.
Which is, and they haven't really done it since. I think there was, I don't remember if there was any other versions where they had the Four Swords mechanics, but
not to my knowledge, no. The closest I think would be the Dynasty Warriors clone that they made recently.
Hyrule Warriors.
Yeah, but that doesn't have any of the charm or really it only resembles Zelda in that all the characters look like they were redesigned from Zelda concept art. I won't speak too long about that game because it's not really anything. It's a placeholder while we're waiting for the next one to come out for the Wii U.
Yeah.
It's something to keep hardcore fans sated.
But there's Legends as well, Hyrule Legends, which is for the Game Boy or for the Nintendo DS.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with those games, they're always going to make. Well, this is kind of Nintendo's deal these days is that if they're making a game for the 3DS, they're going to make it for the Wii U and vice versa.
You see
it with Smash Brothers, right? It's a way to link. Literally, it's a way to link the two systems together. Like if you've already got a 3DS, but you don't have a Wii U, but you still want to play online with your friends who do, then you have the option.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. Not saying it's a good business decision. Yeah, no, it feels like it dilutes the games almost, right?
Well, like I think with the Wii U and the console, the way it's designed, having the secondary screen, like it works well if you have other players, if they're linking their 3DS with the console, so they can sort of share that experience of having like a personal screen and then a shared screen.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always work that way. Like if you play games on the Wii U, you'll realize that there's advantages and disadvantages to having your own personal screen. And for games like Legend of Zelda, it works really well if you're playing solo because it gives you your inventory without having to switch menus. But it doesn't work in some cases like Zombie U, where you legitimately are now distracted from the events of the game because there's no pause menu. So when you go into your inventory, you're literally looking down at your screen, which is your backpack, shuffling things around, and there's zombies clamoring to get you.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to throw a wrench into this for a second and point out that Triforce Heroes on the 3DS is more of a Four Swords-esque throwback, very little to do with the Dynasty Warriors kind of release for the Wii.
Oh, it's called so there's a game called Triforce Warriors, but then there's also Hyrule Warriors Legends,
and independently from that, Triforce Heroes.
Cool. So they did make one.
Yes, which is
awesome.
very Four Swords-esque.
Awesome.
But it's got some online play, I'm given to understand.
Cool.
I have not tried that one.
No. Well, I think I'll speak for myself. I'm a little behind on.
You're never gonna catch up because you realize that even with Wind Waker, they had the Spirit Train, and then Skyward Sword is sort of like
Spirit Tracks.
Spirit Tracks, and the Skyward Sword is sort of like a spiritual and descendant from those, where it's very like weird transportation-y kind of methods involved in the game.
What did you guys think of Skyward Sword? I know that's kind of a divisive game for some people. I thought it was pretty good when I played it the one time I've ever played it. I haven't gone back to it, so maybe that says something. I
quite liked it. I thought that it did a good job integrating. It was a long time coming, waiting for a game release for the next gen console at the time, because Twilight Princess was released for the Wii as well as for the GameCube, but all the features were integrated in a way that you could easily play it without the motion sensing technology.
Right.
Whereas the release of Skyward Sword really made that a mandatory addition.
Whether that's good or not is really up to your own experience, I suppose.
I think the execution was pretty well done. It felt different from some other Zelda games you had. You had almost a world-based mechanic. You would have to fly down to a specific area and then you would access that point, all from a central hub, which you have seen before, but I think I did miss the open world mechanic a little bit, in spite of enjoying the game itself.
Well, because when I look back on Wind Waker, which, as I said, is my favorite of the series, I know a big point of contention was you had to sail everywhere. But that was part of it that I liked, like, a lot. Because whenever I would see, like, an island in the distance that I'd never been to before, and it looked kind of like, you know how each fairy island had kind of a specific shape to it? I would get excited when I saw those because I was like, oh man, I'm going to get something cool. It was like, it's something new. It's unexpected and you're discovering things. That, to me, felt like a nice marriage between the old exploration of like just looking through caves and stuff, finding treasure from the original Zelda games, with the 3D majesty of like your Ocarina of Times, your Twilight Princesses and whatnot. I think that open world aspect really worked in its favor. Possibly you needed it to be a little more populated. Like have a few more bigger islands that take up more than one square of space on that big old map. But the intention there, I think, was pretty interesting.
I mean, I think they used height to their advantage as well. In spite of the fact that the islands could never surpass a certain size, many of them had so much going on a vertical scale.
That's true,
that they made up for it.
Like you look at Dragon Roost Island,
Yeah, exactly.
or Forsaken Fortress, you can see those from a while off. And I can't speak to the HD version. Maybe they increased like the draw distance. Like maybe they had the technology to do that. But I would love to see kind of a game do that again in the Zelda universe, where much like in Skyrim or your Fallout 4's, your Bethesda properties, you're standing on a cliff here, and then you look off way into the distance. You see a structure off in the distance, and you're like, "What's that?" And you can travel all the way there and find out what it is. And that's a big interesting thing about exploration. I would love that in a Zelda game where, much like in like kind of how they did the exploration in Link Between Worlds, you could do that in a 3D version of a Zelda game, but it's more based off of, as you said, the height and the
verticality of
just the imposing nature of certain structures. Like, oh man, that's a temple. I'm gonna go find out what that is, and I can go there, and I'll be equipped no matter what, regardless of where I am in the game. Right?
Well, it's like Death Mountain from Ocarina of Time, right? Like you can see the volcano, from the very start. Like there's a looming cloud sort of huddled around the peak of the mountain.
Yes,
and it becomes a very critical part of the way that the realm is laid out. You have like with Ocarina of Time and some of the Legend of Zelda games, like it's very much about the story. And it's not as unfocused as like the Bethesda or BioWare games, where you can do whatever you want, and the story can sometimes fall to the wayside. But with Legend of Zelda, it is very much like the pacing is a little bit more snappy when it comes to the temples are where you're gonna find the next piece of gear or the next exciting revelation in the story.
I want to touch on that point too. Part of the reason that I think it would be difficult to completely integrate these two ideas is that very much a part of the Zelda universe is finding a balance between the limited set of items that you get. When you compare and contrast it to something in the Bethesda universes, you run into a situation where there's a nigh infinite amount of items and upgrades and interesting things that you can add to your portfolio of you.
A lot of loot.
Right, and you can't really get that in the same way in a Zelda game because they've got a tightly honed item system. And
I'll give you an example of how they almost nailed it perfectly. It's not a Zelda game, it's not a Bethesda game, but I know it's a game we all love, and that's Shadow of the Colossus.
I was going to bring that up.
And essentially, each Colossus is a dungeon. Now, in that game, you are required to do them in a certain order, but you start off with every item in the game, to my knowledge.
They don't withhold anything from you.
No, it's not like your Metroid game where it's like, oh, you don't get the super powerful Mega Sword blaster until the very end when you know it's required. No, like Wander starts out with his magic sword, his bow, and his horse, and you have to use those things in new ways. Like it challenges you by you have to think differently, but your loadout remains the same. It remains constant, and Zelda does that to a point. Like
well, it's a sword and sorcery game at its core, right?
Yeah,
So you're not replacing your sword with anything else.
Yeah, I'm not saying you have to go the full Bethesda route where suddenly Link has like, oh, this is the Master Sword with additional strength bonuses. Like, no, that'd be dumb. But just the from environment standpoint, where you have these vast environments where they're really nice to look at and really interesting. Actually, The Witcher kind of comes to mind a little bit, just in terms of a tone, I suppose. But I do see what you're saying, that, yeah, it would be difficult to integrate just how much information and how much stuff there is in that kind of Bethesda RPG would be difficult to translate in the focused kind of direction a Zelda game would take.
Only because it tends to be your reward and your propulsion to explore as the incentive of this improvement mechanic.
Right.
In some games they give you experience, in some games they give you items. In Zelda you're rewarded with the progression of the storyline, as well as, perhaps you'll get access to this next area. I think there's a linear thread that runs through the story, and following it rewards you. So while I'd love to see a more evolved exploration mechanic, and I think Wind Waker did it excellently, it would be quite a balancing act for Nintendo to pull off, and a bit of a gamble.
You can have mechanics that are similar to Dark Souls, where you have you understand that the item mechanics can't change too much. Like if you're picking up a bomb, the bomb has to respond like the bomb does in the game, because that's what you expect. But you have aspects where maybe there are things you can attach to those items so that it imbues them with certain properties, and you can switch them out. So it's not like you have a bomb and then you have another bomb and then you have another bomb in your inventory, but you equip a rune to it, which makes it when it explodes, there's ice effects to it, so you can freeze a target with it.
They actually they kind of played around with that in Twilight Princess. I believe it was Twilight Princess, because you could combine bombs and arrows together to make bomb arrows. And that was really cool, and that would be interesting is if you had your set amount, your set items, but then you got little smaller things, like you said, like maybe like a magical power or something that you could fuse them together for a set amount of time. A thing I liked about Skyward Sword, getting back to that, is they had an interesting crafting system where you collected resources and you could upgrade your equipment, which was really interesting because you had your set items, you had your hook shot, you had your bow, you had your whatever, but you would start out with kind of like the shit version. Like your bow was basically just like a stick that was bent with a string attached, but as you upgraded it to the I think the highest one was like the goddess bow, like it looks all pink, and like it's got like flourishes and stuff, and you're like, oh man, look at that sweet thing. It's still the same item, still does the same thing, it still provides the same purpose, but maybe it does a tad more damage, and from a visual standpoint it shows a progression in your advancement of the game.
Looks a little more impressive overall.
It's also completely optional. You don't have to do it. You can get to Ganon and fight him and be like, look at my wooden playthings that I've got. I mean, you'll have the Master Sword, but whatever. So I think a crafting system could work to an extent. They couldn't go crazy with it like they do in a Bethesda game. I think they would have to show some restraint, as Nintendo has been known to do. They've been pretty intelligent in the past with how they've handled things.
Well, their game design is probably one of the best in terms of like the focus is always based on
definitely when it comes to consistency. Consistency in a single game is definitely their strong suit. Like you look at your Metroids, you look at your Zeldas, Fire Emblem, all their IPs, they feel like what they're supposed to feel across the board. Like nothing really feels out of place.
You can accuse them of having a formula that they follow, but frankly, I think that just the execution of it is always so dependably interesting. There are a couple of twists here and there, but they pursue it in a familiar way, but they do it in a way that sheds new light or gives a new perspective or tells a new story. And yeah, I think the execution of it is it's good enough to justify following similar trails.
Yeah, of course. And it's a testament to those stories and to the mechanics and whatnot that we find familiar, like the characters and whatnot, that we want to see them again and again. Like a Zelda game is never not going to sell all of the titles and make all of the money, because it's Link, it's Zelda. It might not be Ganon, it usually is, but it's those characters that you want to see over and over again, and you kind of want that dependability and that consistency. You don't want things to change too much, you want some invention, sure, but if you go from Zelda 1 to Zelda 2, which was a completely different game. I don't know if you guys have played Zelda 2. But
was that the side scroller?
It's the side scroller that feels more like a Castlevania game.
Or like a Metroidvania, like you're going through dungeons. Yeah, I've played it. Yeah, it's okay.
It's an interesting idea, but maybe not what people wanted, right?
The expectations are definitely flipped when that game came out. But I think it was in response to the popularity of games like Metroid.
Yeah.
Right, where it becomes very much like, you're navigating through dangerous territory. But from what I've heard, the difficulty factor in that game was excessive, and a lot of people had a difficult time playing the game because it was punishing, and not like not like Dark Souls where you're punished for making bad decisions.
You're punished for being bad at the game, essentially.
No,
right?
It's not even being bad at the game. It's cheap. Like, there's a lot of like cheap things within, like, you can die a cheap death because the enemy that's in that dungeon has an extremely fast attack rate, and there's stuff flying around, and the floor is lava, right? So it's like everything is stacked against your favor. Yeah. So. Like, the mechanics weren't very well thought out. I think it was just sort of like filling that gap between the very first Legend of Zelda, basing it off its popularity and what they were hoping would be the next step.
Right.
And Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask sort of follows. They changed the formula again. Where it was a top-down, isometric adventure game for a long time, but like the Game Boy editions, right? And then all of a sudden you have a 3D world where you can run around, and there's fully realized cities with characters that have interesting stories to tell our lives,
which was a huge deal. I mean, that was the first real. It was amongst the first successful implementations of a real 3D system. Sure, you had earlier games that had an isometric kind of 3D presentation, but definitely it was revolutionary in the field of especially over-the-shoulder third-person games. I think that what they did, especially with the introduction of the thumbstick as they did it, it was just brilliant and hugely revolutionary for its time. Before that, often when you were trying to move around in a 3D environment, you'd have the whole hand stick. I don't know how I would describe it for a listener. Your whole hand goes on this
it's
stick.
like an arcade style.
Yeah,
it's like a joystick with a button on top and like a button as a trigger. So it's essentially the nunchuck attached to a stick, right?
Right.
You wobble around.
And getting away from that idea was a huge part of the development of games as we know them today.
Yeah.
Because at the time of the N64, the only other consoles that were sort of... Oh, I guess they hadn't come out yet, but the original PlayStation was a couple years later.
I believe it followed. Yeah. This is the part where we would check our facts, but I'm pretty sure that that is indeed the order of events.
All right. So, so Alex said that your first Legend of Zelda was Wind Waker.
Wind Waker, yeah.
You said yours was Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. So, and you said you want to know about my history with Legend of Zelda.
Yeah.
So I started with the N64, and I never owned Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask, so I had to borrow them from my friends to be able to play them.
Right.
And up until recently, like, I got my hands on Ocarina of Time again for my 3DS, and I hit the same problems. I got to the stupid water temple, I beat it, and then my battery died, and it didn't save, so it kicked me right to the beginning, and I was like,
"That's an old school problem."
Yeah. It's the problem is it's not as like if I was doing the water temple in one go, I'd figure it out. But if I break it, I lose my train of thought, and I'll come back and I'm confused as to where I left off because of the verticality of the temple.
Yep.
Right, moving up and down and adjusting the water levels. And every time I go back to it, I'm just like, I did this already. Why am I having to do this again? Why am I being punished? So I stopped. But Majora's Mask was different because it had the mechanic of the masks themselves and being able to change into different classes or different characters with different abilities changed the gameplay tremendously. And the story was a lot darker and definitely more sinister than Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, that's what I understand of it. Yeah.
And Ganon is not a figure at all in that game.
No.
The Gerudos make an appearance, but there's no mention of Ganon, and it's a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
So it takes some all of the best features from Ocarina of Time, and applies even better mechanics and even more interesting aspects to the game to make it a more enjoyable experience in my opinion.
Makes it a sequel and not a retread.
But sequels tend to be really shoddy sometimes, right? They're banking that the original title will solidify sort of the claim to fame in the sequel, and it doesn't necessarily work out. Like we talked about Mass Effect and Mass Effect 2, and how I felt about that and how you felt about it.
Yep.
Right, and it's I don't think Legend of Zelda suffered from those flaws, where they don't drastically change the formula. They keep it familiar, but they always improve on it. So they're never taking anything away, but they're always making it better, making it tighter.
Well, the interesting history of Majora's Mask is that a lot of the assets from Ocarina of Time were reused, repurposed. So you had models, the 3D models themselves were reused to represent different characters in a different world, which is part of the reason they had to move it from Hyrule to Termina, just to introduce this new place so that the characters could take on new life. And I think that saving that amount of back-end developing effort freed up a lot of creative processes so that they could release that sequel in a shockingly short amount of time after the original. I think it was two or 3 years after the release of Ocarina of Time that they came out with Majora's Mask.
Yeah.
And they introduced a lot of really revolutionary concepts even now. They had so the whole game, of course, runs on this clock.
You have 3 days.
3 days, yeah. To do nominally everything. Nominally, you have 3 days in-game time to beat the whole game, but they have an interesting mechanic where the time turns back and everyone's lives are reset, and anything you've done is reset too. And you would think that it would be incredibly frustrating, but they managed to cleverly implement it in this way that enables you to have this microcosm of someone's life. And in fact, that's a huge part of the game, is just investigating these people's day-to-day lives, knowing that you have a specific frame of reference for this person over the 3-day period, which is, in their minds, these characters' minds, going to lead to the end of the world. Really, really clever mechanic, and I've never really seen anything quite like it again. It can be frustrating to lose your progress if the 3 days reset before you've had a chance to clinch that final influence, because you have a huge influence over the events of the world. But just the ability to go back and then see them again and have a reason that their dialogue and thoughts change, instead of just, you beat the next temple, so the NPCs all say something different.
Yeah.
Was a huge deal. Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
And speaking on that with the NPCs, that's something that you see in Ocarina of Time. As you say, you beat the fire temple in the Dodongo Caverns, and then suddenly it's just like all the Gorons are like, "Hey, you beat the temple. That's great. You're a Goron now. Okay, see ya." Never talk to me again. Like they just never, they never.
But you have no
speak to
reason of
again.
going back either. Right? There's
No,
very
it's
little
true.
reason of going back to an area in Ocarina of Time once you've sort of finished with it, unless you're going back to unlock something or trying to
Or
collect
like
a heart piece
Or
or
you,
something.
you missed a chest or something.
Yeah. But in Majora's Mask, because of that time traveling aspect,
Yeah.
multiple things are happening at the same time in the same place.
Yeah.
So, barring spoilers, I'm not going to, reveal anything to you, but you do have to go back to participate in certain events that will only become available to you after you finish the temple in that area.
Right.
Because it changes, like you rewrite history, and those things will carry over in your reset.
And that's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's always been a cool mechanic in whatever games have attempted it. Chrono Trigger comes to mind, but we'll talk about that another day. Yeah, with Zelda, I want to talk about a specific character and his influence on all of the games, and that's Ganondorf.
I thought it was going to be Tingle.
No, not Tingle.
Tingle's great. It's not. He's so
Tingle's
annoying.
weird, man. No, I want to talk about Ganondorf for a second, because there's a lot of the games and like, and I'm gonna take over the world because Triforce of Power, and I'm evil, I guess. I lived with a bunch of women my whole life. You should be nicer. Anyway, so Ganondorf in, like, you know, your Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time, he's just the evil bad guy who wants to steal the Triforce and take over the universe. It wasn't until I played, until I got to the end of Wind Waker and played it like a second or third time and actually paid attention to what he's saying at the end of the game, where it's like he's actually kind of a tragic hero towards the end of the game. I mean, he's still got his cackling moments where, like, obviously there's some evil in him, but when he, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't played Wind Waker, spoilers right now, when Link kills him, or rather, buries the Master Sword into his forehead and turns him to stone, his last words are something akin to, like, can you hear the wind blowing? And his last little monologue to Link and Zelda speak to the fact that the world has flooded because the gods abandoned it, and he's trying to salvage it, like he's trying to get it back to the way it was. So his motivations are much more complex in Wind Waker than I think they are in any other game. Every other game, he's just the big pig monster that you fight at the end with the weird nose and the two swords. But not in not in Wind Waker so much. Like, you fight his puppets because it's an obligation at that point. You have to fight the multiple forms of Ganon. But once you fight Ganondorf himself, it feels like you're a little more emotionally invested in why you're doing it.
A compelling villain makes for a compelling story too.
Does.
Right?
Yeah.
So having a very two-dimensional character where all you're really doing is stopping him at every turn without really understanding why he's doing what his reasons and motivations are, which is, I think, it's harder in Ocarina of Time to really understand, because that is essentially what it comes down to. It feels like
he's just an asshole who shows up, kidnaps Zelda, and knocks you into a river.
Well, I think he wants to rule Hyrule, and he wants the king to let him marry Zelda when she's still a child.
But we're never given any reason why. Like, just power for power's sake, I suppose.
That's, I think, the hardest part about it is, he's fundamentally motivated by power, and he has to be, because he's the recipient of the Triforce of Power.
Wouldn't it be interesting, though, if we had a Zelda game where the Triforce of Power was the hero's Triforce piece, and maybe the bad guy was the Triforce of Courage or Wisdom?
It would be definitely interesting to see it turned around like that.
Yeah.
What I would like to see, the tricky part about having the Triforce of Power and this power motivation is that it's very hard to, as a normal human, relate to on any level that sort of motivation. None of us really walk out to our job at the grocery store and say, I want power!
I will become the manager of Zelda.
Chad Vader.
Yeah, really.
So seeing something, it's very hard to humanize that, and I feel like a more human villain is compelling. You still want enough motivation to stop them, but it's nice if there's some kind of clever story aspect which makes it seem understandable what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that The Legend of Zelda has gone in the way of a lot of mythos of almost a Greco-Roman religious sort of context. It's all a play of gods and power and
reincarnation.
Sure, yeah, a lot of very mythical sort of era proportions, which I can understand makes the story feel very important, but also it's nice to have a human element too.
Yeah. Well, in Link Between Worlds, I didn't expect to be moved by the story in that one, because it was just like, oh, fun, just explore the land and do all the things and get all the items and awesome, Zelda, sweet. But you get to the end of that game, and actually, I shed a couple tears at the end of it. Have you guys played it? No? You have?
Essentially my gameplay of Legend of Zelda ends with Majora's Mask.
Do you want me to spoil the ending of it.
Yeah,
for
you know what? I think it's fine because in a lot of cases
Okay.
I'm probably not going to be going back to
All right, so I'll lay it down for you.
drop those beats.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
So in Link to the Past, you've got the light world and the dark world, and that's reflected again in Link Between Worlds. You actually get a cool power where you can go through rifts in the dimension, and you end up in Low Rule, which is the polar opposite to Hyrule, or at least it's like a mirror world essentially. And it's interesting because Low Rule is it looks like what Hyrule would be if Ganon did succeed and take over and just destroyed everything. There's like parts of the map are inaccessible through just walking around because there's great chasms that have been rent through the earth, and like all of the inhabitants have been turned into monsters or replaced by monsters. Everybody who, like, any humans left are wearing masks and just kind of hiding out in one specific area. And basically it's an apocalypse at that point. Now there's an equivalent to Zelda in I believe she's Princess, I want to say Hilda.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think it's Hilda. And at first, I'm like, is she gonna be evil? She looks kind of goth to me. Like, she's got the purple hair, and she looks like a dark Zelda essentially.
Right.
But she's not. She's just the princess of the land, and like you're playing Link, she had a hero as well, but he failed. And throughout the game, you're saving both kingdoms essentially, and you're helped out by the mysterious figure Ravio, who's just this guy wearing a bunny hood who rents you items at first, and then you can buy them later. And it's revealed at the end of the game that he was the hero of Low Rule, and he was just trying to help you out. And when you defeat Ganon at the end of the game, the legend of the Triforce is that whoever touches it is granted a wish by the goddesses. So Link touches the Triforce and he wishes for Low Rule to get restored. And I'm already kind of tearing up thinking about it because it goes from Link and Zelda to Ravio and Hilda, and you just watch their world get restored, and everything's right, and you actually feel like a hero at that point. And this was the emotional context that I was looking for, or rather not looking for in that game, but found anyway. Not to say that there was a humanizing villain like in Wind Waker. Ganon is just Ganon. He's just a big pig monster that you have to fight. Whatever. But it's not about him at that point. It's about saving that other world where you're saving Hyrule, and you're also saving Low Rule, but by extension you're preventing Hyrule from ever looking like that. And it's a very interesting way of showing you what could happen without actually having it happen, and also expanding the map basically twofold. But that's why I think that game works really well, and I like the Legend of Zeldas when they have that emotional, they got the tearjerker moments towards the end. You get that at the end of Wind Waker 2 when the credits finally roll and the two bubbles with Link and Tetra.
This whole episode, all I'm thinking about is how much you have to play Majora's Mask.
I know,
Humanized
right?
villain, characters you care about.
It's like, where's that perfect Zelda game? It exists. Go play it, Alex. And I will.
I won't say it's perfect.
It's not perfect, no.
And
what game is?
It definitely has its flaws, but it's just so beautiful in its execution and sort of that dark tones. Like a lot of the the Zelda games tend to end up being very light. Like there's the world is going towards darkness, but there's a lightness to it still.
Yeah.
But with Majora's Mask, because of those 3 days, that pressure never goes away. That tension, that ominous feeling never goes away. And having that moon just like looming over you at all times.
Oh, I've seen the moon. So
it's an apocalyptic Zelda game.
It's been on my list for years, and I don't know why it's taken me so long to actually get around to it. Much like Chrono Trigger, now that I'm thinking about it. I only played that game like maybe 3 years ago, even though it's the greatest video game ever made. Greatest RPG, anyway. So, I mean, what else would you like to cover with Legend of Zelda? Like, it's a pretty influential series. We've talked about where we want it to go, talked about where it's been.
How about sort of how it's influenced, aspects of our creative lives, or just in general of like the things that it's led us into exploring more as adults? Or
Good idea. Well, I can speak to that because let's see, 3 years ago, I believe. It was around the first. I think it was the first year, or no, second year that we went to Fan Expo. Um, Before that, in the year 2015, I developed 3 Legend of Zelda pieces to sell as fan art there, and it's hard sometimes doing fan art that feels original, because you're taking properties and characters that already exist and have already had a lot of thought put into them. So it's like, where do you go from there? And for me, with creating a piece about Link, before I made those 3 pieces, I'll put a link in our description. But I wasn't happy with any of the Legend of Zelda art that I had done before. I was like, this is not the best I can do, and I didn't know why. And then I had an idea, just kind of rattling around in my brain, that what would it look like if Link looked what would it look like if he had all of his equipment actually displayed on his person, like not just it disappears into the void when
just a little
he
bag
doesn't
of
need
holding.
it. Yeah. Like, what would it look like if you, like, how much equipment could you realistically pack onto this guy before he started to look like a hoarder? So that was the experiment that I started to run with, and then I was like, well, what would it look like if he was older and like had seen a lot of shit, basically, was more of an experienced person. And then it started kind of like the gears started turning in my head, and I started to think about a world past Ocarina of Time, like past Twilight Princess, where Link doesn't return the Master Sword, he keeps it, and he eventually becomes the general of Zelda's armies, and is ever vigilant and ever watchful against the return of Ganon's forces and the return of evil. So the piece of Link that I started with has him. He's got like a big beard. He's all grizzled and old, and he's got the uniform, but it's a little more tattered and ornate, and it's got pieces of armor added on here and there, with all of the items displayed on a series of belts and bandoliers that he's got on him. So after I finished that piece, like, I did 2 more. I did a Zelda, which is an aged up kind of Queen Zelda, and then I did a Ganondorf, displaying him escaping from the negative zone, I guess we'll call it, wherever he gets sent to.
The Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone. That's where Zelda has mainly inspired me in terms of my own creation, and my own art. After those pieces were done, I don't think I'm ever going to do another Zelda piece again. I just haven't had the drive because I poured so much into it. And like, blanking on the name of the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, but that's all I needed to say.
Harper Lee.
Harper Lee, thank you. That's all I needed to say about that series through my own creative means. And I don't know if I'll ever have to revisit it. So that's me, at least.
What about you, Kurt?
Gosh, it's been a huge inspiration in a lot of ways. Most of this is past tense because I was deeply obsessed with The Legend of Zelda for many years. I have usernames that are based off of the series.
Oh God, I remember that now.
I have pages and pages of. I used to be a digital artist. I still digitally paint sometimes, but much of my work is in the past tense. And there's an enormous repository of all the ludicrous fan art that I made for years of The Legend of Zelda. I drew. It was a huge part of my inspiration of starting to draw in the first place. along with the Dark Times, aka Anime Origins.
Oh
But
god.
I know you've spoken about that before
Oh my
on this
goodness.
podcast.
Too much Inuyasha fan art, man.
So yeah, that was a huge part of my work in terms of digital painting. It was a source of inspiration. I found the world compelling. I made web comics when web comics were still fairly new to the scene, and it was just I can't believe how many times I've drawn that green tunicked man.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it was even a compelling factor for my music. I play the piano, more often the guitar these days. And when I was first starting out in it, I had this big goal to play all these pieces from the soundtrack, because God, it is just a chilling soundtrack from Ocarina of
It's
Time.
iconic, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And so there were so many pieces that I would listen to over and over again. I spent years on the forums of what was then OC Remix. Just a collection.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
You're taking me back, man.
Yeah, collection. You asked?
No, this is great. This is great. I'm just having a good time.
Collections of all these video game soundtracks that people had played with, and I listened to that elaborately. So the idea that you play it on your own on the piano or whatever means you had was so fascinating. And I spent hours and hours playing those songs. Yeah, got huge creative force for me. I don't dabble in the same media anymore, but I can't overstate the amount of inspiration I drew from that series. Some still holds up, some it's a little embarrassing, but yeah.
Like that DeviantArt username, which I won't disclose.
Much obliged.
No problem.
Yeah. Well, we missed it, but I think there was a symphony orchestra that was covering the
Danielle
sound.
got to go to that.
A bunch of our friends actually went.
God damn it.
It kind of came out of nowhere, and I guess we're not as tight on the music scene as people that are sort of living in the Toronto core are.
I guess not.
But yeah, like they loved it. It's a fantastic event to go to, and maybe it'll come back, because it's not the only time they've done it before.
Yeah.
So maybe next time we'll go and we'll check it out.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Because I remember when Skyward Sword came out, they released, I think it was with the special edition of the game, they released the 25th anniversary soundtrack,
Mm-hmm.
which was completely orchestral. And then they took that show, I think it was what's the band called? Or the ensemble? It's like the Symphony of the Goddesses, I think it's called, where they play originally composed arrangements of the Zelda soundtrack, taking bits from different games. Like there's a Wind Waker suite. There's your Ocarina of Time medley.
So they're combining
a general
flow.
overture. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not just they'll take 5 minutes and be like, this is Saria's theme, this is Ganon's theme. No, they'll combine pieces of music into a grand epic.
Well, music for games is very cyclical, because it has to loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it
You need
doesn't
a
necessarily.
coda.
Sorry.
You need a coda,
Yeah.
that sort of structure.
well, it also sets the tone for different environments and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we get a lot of that music from. They do forest.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Unfortunately.
Well, it's deeply there's so much interesting music in the Zelda universe.
Yeah.
And I think that I really want to get Alex to casually edit in the Forest Temple, which sounded like this, was haunting.
Oh, I'll do it.
And then the Fairy's Fountain,
Wait, do
which
you think
sounded like this.
Do you think we'll get flagged if I do that? Though?
I have no idea. You're gonna have to play it by ear.
And
But
not Nintendo specifically, but the Pokemon Company has been on a blitz for taking stuff down because of the 20th anniversary, which happened some time ago.
All right, then maybe I won't do that. Sorry.
use your imagination, listeners.
Sorry, fans. I'll just.
I think with the Legend of Zelda, and it goes back to that whole representation thing, where the Gerudos were the first sort of in-game characters where I could see parallels to my own life, with
Okay.
just sort of a visual representation. And every time you walk into that canyon, and that music starts up again for the Gerudo, like the Gerudo theme. I'm
Yeah.
just like, that's my favorite theme in the game.
Do-do-do-do.
Like it's got this Western element to it. Like it feels very
Yeah.
like it's very alive.
Mhm. Well, yeah, it feels kind of Western meets kind of like Lawrence of Arabia kind of thing, where it's like, you know, well, it's a desert, obviously, so there is that. It's kind of hokey, but I remember that part in Twilight Princess where you're essentially being a gunslinger with your bow, and I'm pretty sure there was like a Western track, and it was really weird. You're like in a ghost town, just in Twilight. It was odd. It didn't really fit, but I get what you're saying with Gerudo Valley. That's one of my favorite tracks.
And a weird mechanic too when you go into the valley, because you get captured because
Yep.
you're not supposed to be seen by the Gerudo, and that carries over into Majora's Mask as well. You're not supposed to be seen.
Like there's some stealth parts.
Ish, yeah, but like I don't remember if there was a specific reason why. I know that the Gerudos is a society of women only,
Correct.
and because you're a male character, you offend them.
Well, you're not allowed, I guess.
You're not allowed there, yeah, and yeah, they would like throw you in prison, and you have to like sneak out again.
Well, I mean, you gotta take it from their point of view. Like the only man that they've got from their race is Ganondorf, and he's a huge asshole. So they're like, man, like if that's what all men are like, then geez,
Yeah, their logistics are
letting in any.
definitely
Yeah. Although
like
I don't,
skewed.
have they ever actually explained like how they like reproduce? Maybe it's magic. I don't know. Anyway, it's Zelda. Whatever.
Hand wave. Magic.
Well, there's a lot of cultures that will abduct into their ranks,
Fair
right?
enough.
So
Fair enough.
There's
Maybe-
one Hylian you can talk to in Hyrule Town that says, "Oh, those Gerudos," and they're, oh boy. It's a little more. It's a little tiny bit more nuanced than that, but not much.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, we don't have to touch on that particular topic. That's fine.
No, for sure.
Yeah. So I think that about wraps it up. I think that's a good place to end it. I don't think we need to delve any deeper into any of those, into any of that kind of thing.
Maybe
so
when the next game comes out.
maybe we'll get some of those answers that we've been searching for
For our lives.
Our entire lives. Yep. Will finally be complete. But yeah, suffice to say that like The Legend of Zelda is such a vast series. It's influenced us creatively. It's influenced us just how we live our lives, you know. So I think everybody can relate to The Legend of Zelda at least a little bit, whether or not it's, you know, Ocarina of Time, whether it's the older titles or Wind Waker or whatever. It seems like there's something for everybody, regardless of whether you like the series or not. Can't deny how influential it's been. In any case, I want to thank our science officer, Kurt Refling, for being on the show and providing his 2 cents.
Ahoy.
And aloha, thank you. So we're gonna set him down back on Earth at some point. Maybe we'll keep him up here for a little while. Hunaid, as always, it was great to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one. This has been STARCHIVES and Commander Alex signing off. See you next time.